Welcome to worship. It is good to have you all here joined together. We were here last week for a conference, and it's good to have us here together again, this time for worship. We welcome those who will be viewing the worship at a later time, but you are part of us here and now. It is always a joy when one of our graduates or our graduating seniors gets to come and do their senior sermon. And so Staci Williams is here today. Staci has been doing the long extended version of study and with great integrity and holding together many pieces in her life. I am grateful that you are here today to bring your senior sermon on strong women. You are indeed a strong woman in your life. I invite you to rise so that we can read the call to worship. We are here this day to worship God. May our hearts be opened and respond. We come for a word that emboldens us to be wise, persuasive, smart, and fearsome. May our actions be great beyond all knowing. Like the women of the Bible, strong and daring. May we stand fully as women and men, living with determination. Please pray with me. O God of every nuance of the masculine and feminine, you have created our bodies to seed the next generation, to grow the next generation, to be in the here and now as the dream of the ancient ones. In our humanity, which you designed with care and purpose, we are strong and agile. We are scared and weak. We are capable of strength to slay dragons or army leaders. We are capable of participating in the birthing of a new movement. How wondrously you have made us. You have made this beautiful and often unfathomable stretch of men and women, all of one thing, not separate, made of one another, for one another. Let us be your fearsome faithful, your forward leaders, your builders, your birthers, your propagators of the next, all for the love of Jesus. Amen.
The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, "When you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live." The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The women answered Pharaoh, "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own.
Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, now that Ehud was dead. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera, the commander of his army, was based in Harosheth Hagoyim, because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They cried to the Lord for help. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord God gone ahead of you?" So Barak went down Mount Tabor with 10,000 men. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword, and Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and all Sisera's troops fell by the sword. Not a man was left. Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was an alliance between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. "I am thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone in there?' say no." But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. Just then, Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. "Come," she said, "I will show you the man you are looking for." So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through his temple, dead. On that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites.
Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah, to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hirah, the Adullamite, went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that, though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she said. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her, slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law, Tamar, is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again.
On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us into her home. "If you consider me a believer in the Lord," she said, "come and stay at my house." And she persuaded us.
Growing up in the church, I learned early of the adventure stories found in the Bible, of Noah building the ark and filling it with animals to survive a great flood, of Joseph being sold into slavery by his brothers, only to forgive them and save them during a famine, of David, a young shepherd boy, slaying a giant with a stone and a sling, of Saul, who persecuted the Christians until he met Jesus on the road to Emmaus and was transformed, of Jesus, the Son of God, who died on a cross for the forgiveness of my sins. I loved all of these stories and the many others to be found there, even the ones that were darker and more violent. I couldn't get enough of these stories. But as I got older, I began to ask myself, where are the stories with girls as the main characters? It seemed to me that all the stories I heard were about men, with women having minor roles in the story. Many of the women were not even named. They are simply given basic description and then referred to by feminine pronouns. I found this disappointing, but accepted it as the way it was. During my undergraduate work, I learned about the history of the Bible. I learned the social structures of the time, of the social status of women. And I discovered why so many of the women are not named, and why so few are the main character in the stories in the Bible. Women were not viewed as equal to men. They were not as important. So I began to wonder, as a girl, am I not as important? Studying theology here at Bethany, I've been introduced to many new ideas and perspectives. I have encountered deeper study of and new interpretations of Scripture. I have learned to see past the words on the page, to delve into the world at the time those words were written, to understand the world behind the text and the world within it. I have been searching the Scriptures for a deeper understanding of women within this story of God's people. I have needed strong women characters to provide an example for me to follow as a faithful daughter of the Most Holy. So this morning, we are going to look at several of these strong women who don't often get talked about. We heard the Scriptures with their stories read. Some of them only get a small mention, but the example they provide is anything but small. The book of Exodus opens with the Israelites, the line of Jacob, being in Egypt. The generation of Joseph and his brothers has passed, and the new Pharaoh did not know Joseph. The Israelites have many children, and their numbers grow quickly. Although the Israelites are slaves to Pharaoh, the sheer number of them is a concern. So he decides to do something about it. He orders the Hebrew babies to be killed at birth. It is interesting to note that in this story, Pharaoh is not named. He is simply referred to as the king of Egypt. However, the women in this story are named: Puah and Shiphrah. The text is ambiguous as to whether they are Hebrew midwives or simply midwives to the Hebrews. However, their names are Semitic rather than Egyptian, which suggests they may have been Hebrew. Whatever their ethnic origin, it is clear that they fear God. It is also not clear if they are the only midwives or if they are simply the only two that defy Pharaoh's orders. William MacDonald suggests that Puah and Shiphrah are the chief Hebrew midwives. So as subjects of the Pharaoh, the midwives faced severe consequences from Pharaoh for disobeying his orders. They put themselves at great risk by letting the Hebrew baby boys live. So they come up with a story to appease Pharaoh's inquiry. They claim the Hebrew women are more vigorous than the Egyptian women, and therefore deliver the baby before they arrive. Pharaoh believes this explanation, and the midwives are not punished. The New Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible interprets the word used to describe the Hebrew women to mean beasts. This definition implies a dehumanization of the Hebrews, which is probably why Pharaoh accepted the explanation. Puah and Shiphrah are the heroines of this story. They are shining examples of strength and faithfulness in the face of personal danger. They remain true to God and defy this earthly leader, and they are rewarded greatly for this. The daily notes of the Scripture Union say this about the midwives. The reward given to the midwives in terms of a flourishing family life was granted them not for their falsehood, but for their humanity. This is not to say that the end justified the means, still less that there are no absolute standards of morality. But in a world as charged with sin and its effects as ours has become, it may be that obedience to greater duties is possible only at the cost of obedience to lesser ones. In this, as in all else, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Sometimes we must defy the rules of earthly leaders in order to obey God's commands. Puah and Shiphrah provide the example of this wisdom. Turning back the pages in our Bibles to Genesis chapter 38. This chapter is an interruption in Joseph's story with a narrative about Judah, his brother. Judah has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. And so when he secures a wife for Tamar, a Canaanite woman. But we learn that is wicked, and God has him slain. So according to the Levirate law, Onan is responsible for her now. He is required to be a surrogate, to have an heir for his brother. And he's not happy about this and refuses to do it. So God deals with him in the same way as he did his brother. Now Judah is very worried about his youngest son. And so he sends Tamar away to her father with a promise that when Shelah is older, he will fulfill this obligation. However, he has no intention of doing this. He does not want to lose another son to this woman. Although custom allowed Judah additional options, he could fulfill the obligation himself, or he could release her as a widow free to marry again. However, he doesn't take these options. Instead, he leaves her as a widow, unable to marry, and who is required to remain chaste. And so he is condemning her to a difficult life. However, she refuses to be a victim. She refuses to be discarded and forgotten. She devises a plan to secure her future. She dresses herself as a prostitute, hiding her face with a veil, and waits for Judah. When he does, not recognizing her, they strike a deal and have sex. He leaves his cord, staff, and ring as collateral for the young goat that he promises as payment. When he attempts to pay up, he's unable to find the woman, and so he calls off this search so that he doesn't get laughed at. A few months later, Judah learns that Tamar is pregnant and calls for her to be burnt to death to restore his honor. However, Tamar is prepared for this. She reveals the cord, staff, and signet ring that belonged to the man who impregnated her. Judah immediately recognizes his stuff and realizes that he has wronged her. The obligation has been fulfilled, and Tamar's place in the family has been secured. Tamar was assertive in demanding her rights. Without the Levirate obligation being fulfilled, she would be left with no legal status and no one to care for her. She was also willing to step outside of convention to secure her future. She didn't wait for Judah to realize his wrongdoing. She made him see it. Once she is brought back into the family, she remains deeply loyal to them. Her assertiveness in action, willingness to be unconventional, and a deep loyalty to family are traits that we find in her descendant, King David. Moving on to the book of Judges. This book is filled with stories that reveal a reoccurring pattern of disloyalty to God, oppression by Israel's enemies, crying out for repentance, and God sending deliverers, the judges. In chapter 4, the Israelites are opposing a Canaanite force that is superior to their own. The judge at this time is Deborah, a prophetess. She sends Barak out to fight against Sisera, the head of the Canaanite king Jabin's army. However, she prophesies that the victory would not be Barak's, but rather a woman's. And this woman is not an Israelite either. She is a Kenite. The Kenites are a group whose ancestry is believed to reach back to Cain. They show up several times throughout the Old Testament, being first mentioned in the story of Abram. At the time of this particular conflict, some Kenites are living in Canaan, separate from the others. Heber and his wife, Yael, are two such Kenites. They are living near where the battle is happening. They have their tent set up there. It is suggested that Heber may have been a metalsmith who was there to repair the Canaanite weapons. During this campaign, Sisera's army is thrown into a panic by the Lord, and they begin to scatter. Sisera flees the battle, and hides in the tent of Yael. Sisera and Yael seem to know each other because when he approaches, she greets him, invites him in, and then agrees to keep quiet about his presence. Exhausted from the battle, he lays down to rest, and she covers him with a blanket, taking care of him. And she gets him some milk to drink. Soon he falls asleep. While he is sleeping, Yael takes a tent peg and drives it through his temple into the ground, killing him. When Barak arrives, Yael takes him to Sisera's dead body, and the Israelites are the victors because of her. While Yael's motives are unclear, the story considers her action the will of God. Although she is an outsider to the Israelites, she throws her lot in with them and becomes a model of strength. Coming from a traditional peace church, I admit Yael's use of violence makes me a bit uneasy. However, by the end of the book of Judges, hundreds of women have been kidnapped and raped. The status and treatment of women in this book reflects the health of Israel. According to the New Interpreter's Dictionary, when women participate fully in community life, society flourishes, the book seems to suggest. And when they are reduced to pawns in men's struggles with one another, civil war ensues. Despite the violent nature of her action, Yael displays courage, strength, and initiative. She does what she thinks is necessary, lending her help and support to the Israelites. For our final story, we're going to jump forward into the New Testament, to the book of Acts, chapter 16. It is here that we meet Lydia. Although it has been suggested that the story may be fictitious, and that Luke adopted the name simply to refer to the region in Asia Minor where Thyatira is located, the character still provides a good example to follow. She is a merchant of fine purple cloth. The use of her personal name and her trade suggests that she enjoyed high social and economic status. It is noted that she is the head of the household, so she is either unmarried, widowed, or divorced. The text does not give us much information. Unlike the other women I've talked about this morning, Lydia's story is not one of heroic action or unconventional assertiveness. However, she is an example of a strong female figure worth emulating. When Paul and Silas come to Philippi, they speak to a group of women who are gathered by the river at a place of prayer. Lydia is among these women. When she hears the message that they share, her heart is opened, and she and her household is baptized. And so then she invites Paul and Silas to stay at her home. She stands as a model of discipleship. Not only does she open her ears to the gospel, she opens her heart. She accepts Jesus Christ without hesitation and is baptized. As William MacDonald suggests, Lydia was not saved by good works, but rather in order to do them. Acts 16, verse 40, indicates that her home is used as the meeting place for the first church in Philippi. Looking at these stories of these women, a picture of female discipleship comes into focus. We see that the men who are predominantly talked about in the Bible are not the only examples for us to look to. Being in a culture that still emphasizes male dominance, it is important for us to read, study, and share these stories of strong women. In a recent conversation with my 12-year-old niece, she revealed to me that she feels pressure from indirect messages to conform to a specific image of who she should be. Although she is very intelligent, thriving in several advanced placement classes, she still feels like she is supposed to fit into a certain box, one where her opinions are kept quiet, her uniqueness is stifled, her interests and actions are limited by convention. Like me as a young girl, she knows the most frequently told stories from the Bible, with men as the main characters. Hearing that I would be sharing the stories of these strong women, she got very excited. She was impressed by these women who weren't afraid to be strong, courageous, assertive, unconventional, faithful, and generous. They didn't stop to think about public perception, about social convention, or about rules and expectations. The children in our lives need to hear these stories as often as those of men as they grow in their faith. They need to see that God frequently calls us outside of convention and expectation to fulfill greater purposes. But these narratives are just a starting point. We also need to share the stories of the women throughout history. Joan of Arc, Sojourner Truth, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Sarah Ryder Major, Helen Keller, Eleanor Roosevelt, Mother Teresa, Rosa Parks, Malala Yousafzai, not sure I'm saying that right. And the list goes on and on. These are the women whose stories are known, the ones that are recorded for history. But there is more than just these stories. All of us are aware of women in our lives. Maybe your grandmother, your aunt, your mother, your daughter, perhaps even yourself, whose story reveals courage, strength, faithfulness, assertiveness, and unconventionality. They are illustrations that need to be shared and talked about. I encourage each of you to think about those women in your life and share their story with the children and with each other. We can change the expectations of girls and women by lifting up examples that stand outside conventional norms. So let's flood the world with our stories.
There are a variety of these in various places, so if you need a hymnal or a songbook, you may go.
Go with God into the world. Share your stories that we may strengthen each other.